Hello and welcome back to Bookish Theories. In today's video, I would like to talk about NewJeans Oh My God, focusing on a not so little breakdown and analysis of the concept and the music video to see what they can tell us about the story so far and its connections to Ditto. Oh My God is a song that talks about the contrasting emotions of a girl thinking about her crush. According to the press release, the lyrics portray an inner conflict in the girl's mind. The song portrays a wish to get close to the boy that she likes, while at the same time also expressing a sense of distance, caution and unfamiliarity in relation to this romance. In the video, this inner conflict is brought to life with a surreal concept blurring the boundaries between fiction and reality. Set in a psychiatric ward, the video portrays NewJeans as mental patients, each of which are experiencing a different delusion. Throughout the narrative, the girls tell us their story and the reason why they are there to begin with, but as the video progresses, it becomes more and more difficult to tell what is real and what is not. Reality gets mixed with illusion, the fictional storyline of the video merges with real life, and the characters of the story interact with people that also exist in our world. In Oh My God, reality is deconstructed and made into something subjective. It's not a matter of what is real anymore, but rather what is real to each of the characters in the story. Now if we take a look at the big picture here, this was also one of the central themes of Ditto, which in turn told us the story of a girl named Heesoo. In side A and side B, Heesoo was portrayed as a young student who got lost in a delusion where she imagined the members as her friends. Desperate for a way to cope with a lonely reality, Heesoo hid behind the camera and made up her own reality where she was surrounded by loving friends. As I mentioned in my Ditto breakdown, Heesoo's story can be seen as a metaphor for the dynamics between fans and idols, or even better, when these dynamics get a little bit out of control. While idols can provide a positive distraction that can give you comfort and happiness, when somebody spends too much time in this fantasy and forgets to live, this positive interaction can become the very thing keeping you from living well. After watching Oh My God, I still stand with this theory, but I also think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. You see, when it comes to the lore itself, there is still quite a lot to unpack. Since my last video, for instance, Heesoo got her own YouTube channel under the name Ban Heesoo. The name itself is very interesting here because depending on how you pronounce it, Ban Heesoo literally sounds like bunnies, thus reinforcing the idea that the girl is a representation of fans themselves. On the channel, Heesoo expands on the lore by posting videos of the girls mostly dated 1998 and 1999, and as we see in a second, some of these videos also reference the delusions that we see in Oh My God. Even more importantly, Heesoo does appear in the video, but this time as a background character. We see her holding a bunny sitting in the back, she's mentioned in Annie's story, and at the end she complains on Twitter about the video itself because it's way too complicated and weird. This tells us two things. Number one, that Heesoo would not subscribe to my channel, and number two, that Ditto and Oh My God are definitely connected through the same story. In order to understand what this story is about, however, we have a lot to unpack, so let's start from the top and see what's going on. At the beginning, the video opens with the girls having a group session in the psychiatric ward. The doctor is played by actor Kim Joo-han, and in the video he wants the members to tell each of their stories. The first one that we see is Honey, who ended up in there because she thinks that she is an iPhone. As she recalls her delusion, we see her running inside of the phone in a desperate attempt at finding the alarm. In a nice touch, we also see that she's dressed like the late Steve Jobs. She got the glasses, the black turtleneck, the blue jeans, which is exactly what he wore throughout his entire career. In her account of the events, Honey tells us that at first she was very confused about who and where she was. She began to question her identity, and she became very confused about the difference between the real her and what people said about her. When she finally found the alarm button and smashed it or whatever, we can say that Honey had a literal wake-up call, because at that moment she realized that she's none other than an iPhone. She exists for you. When you call, she will come at any time and anywhere, and she'll show you anything that you want to see. She will speak for you, sing for you, answer to your every question, and find a way to give you everything that you could ask for. Realizing that makes her ashamed that she was even worrying about her identity. It doesn't matter who she is anymore, because her sole purpose is that to serve you. As Annie looks at Minji through the lenses of the camera and takes a photo of her, Minji then asks if she's Siri, to which Annie replies in Siri's voice that she is correct. Now this part here is very surreal, because even if the scene is quite funny, in more ways than one, what she's saying can be compared to how some people think idols should behave. More often than not, their job is considered as a calling, a higher purpose, and more often than not, their own needs and individuality are ignored for the sake of what people want. Being an idol is like being a phone, in the sense that people like Heesoo, for instance, rely on them for many different things. They are more than singers and dancers, they are a source of emotional support, entertainment, entertainment, company, and sometimes even education and change. This underlying metaphor is made even more evident because in the phone, Honey tries to contact Heesoo, but Heesoo doesn't reply. As I already mentioned, Heesoo is an embodiment of bunnies, so Honey literally phoning her is her way to connect with you. Metaphor aside, however, this part is also connected to the lore itself, because the reason why Heesoo doesn't reply is actually explained in the YouTube channel. In the video from December 29, 1998, Heesoo recorded the girls doing PE as they play around on the chairs. That is the same scene that we saw back in Ditto, and in the description, Heesoo reveals that on this day, Honey finally bought a phone. The problem is that Heesoo thinks that she gave her the wrong number, so in Oh My God, Heesoo probably doesn't reply because of that. Now, to be fair, in 1998, iPhones didn't really exist yet, but then again, neither did YouTube. This could mean that the entire Heesoo timeline might not be as reliable as we think, and this idea might also be confirmed by the latest videos on the channel, which in turn are dated 2023. Now, in order to explain this sudden change, we can actually rely on Oh My God, because as I mentioned before, it seems that Heesoo is in the video as one of the other patients in the ward. At the beginning, for instance, we see her sitting with other people doing the group session, and when the girls wander around at night, we see that she's also there holding the bunny. To further mess with our heads, when the camera cuts, the background changes to confuse us even more. Sometimes the girls are alone, and sometimes only the bunny is there. Sometimes Heesoo is with the girls, and sometimes she's by herself, and we don't really know what is true and what is not, which is kind of the point that the video is trying to make. You see, considering what we saw until now, it seems that Heesoo might be a patient in present day, who is creating her own world in the 90s by taking inspiration from what she sees in real life. The boundaries between reality and delusion, however, are very blurred, because in the world, the delusions of different people collide into one. In Minji's case, for instance, her delusion is thinking that she's a doctor and not a patient. In her fantasy, she's actually curing the other members, so much so that in the video we see her perspective as she observes them doing their episodes. The first that she tries to have, for instance, is Annie, whom we see talking to the wall while thinking that she's the phone. Approaching her with a lot of care, Minji interrupts her episode and momentarily brings her back to reality. Then she appears in Hane's subway fantasy, staying by her side while she's lost in her own mind. She approaches Danielle while she laughs at the white nose on TV, and then she intervenes when Erin is drawing on the ambulance. Every time that she interacts with one of the members, they end up in the ambulance one after the other, but by the end, Dr. Minji approaches Minji herself, so she ends up in the psychiatric ward together with the others. Next up we get to Hane, whose delusion was actually foreshadowed on the YouTube channel a few days before release. In the video from December 28, 1998, Heesoo complains that these days Hane's princess syndrome is getting severe. It's so severe, in fact, that she keeps asking where she can buy a glass slipper, which is something that makes Heesoo very mad. In Oh My God, we see Hane's princess syndrome in full effect, because her delusion involves a love story where she is the main character. As we see in the index of her book, Hane crafted a fantasy where the different chapters are inspired by different movies and stories that she likely heard in real life. In this fantasy, she's obviously a princess, and her love interest is none other than Danielle. As the index suggests, this love story begins with a reference to the most iconic scene from La Bombe, which is a very famous French movie from the 80s about a 13-year-old girl falling in love for the first time. The scene in question takes place during a party where the girl is approached by her crush who would like to dance. Since the party is playing rock and roll, the boy puts headphones on her head playing a romantic song they can slow dance to. Fittingly enough, the lyrics of this song talk about dreams becoming the reality, which is exactly what happens to Hane in Oh My God. In the second chapter of the love story, her delusion evolves into Cinderella. While she's slow dancing with Danielle, her Apple Watch tells her that it's midnight and it's now time to go. When she runs away, she loses one of the glass slippers, which is later found by Danielle, and since the spell is now broken, Princess Hane has to go back home using the subway, which is why chapter 3 references a movie with the same name. In chapter 4, her story takes a turn for the worse. After enjoying the night, Hane now becomes the little match girl, which is the story of a young child who dies of hypothermia while trying to sell matches on New Year's Eve. Like in the original story, we see that Hane lights the matches in order to stay warm, but in the video she is not alone because Erin appears next to her holding an apple. Following the book, we are now getting to chapter 5 of the story, where Hane suddenly becomes Snow White. In this context, Erin plays the role of the evil queen in disguise, tempting her with the apple, and when Hane bites into it, we see that she's poisoned and considered dead. At this point, the story goes from Snow White to Sleeping Beauty. In a desperate attempt at saving her life, Danielle is a modern-day Prince Charming riding a bike instead of a horse. She wants to reach her to wake her up, but Hane's love story doesn't have a happy ending because her fairy tale ends with the Revenant. Instead of being awakened because of a true love's kiss, Hane wakes up at the sight of Danielle's body killed by a bear. Her story ends with the animal standing next to her deathbed, and when we go back to the session, Hane is now a ghost looking sadly at a teddy bear. These visuals imply that in her story, Hane was eventually killed by the bear, so now she is not only a princess, but rather a ghost princess. Now next up we get to Erin, who in turn experiences a delusion where she thinks that she is a cat. In her section, she introduces herself by showing a doodle of a cat, and even if the other members are a bit weirded out by her eating cat food, they do listen to her story while she's in the form of a grey cat. Now this part is quite interesting because her delusion connects us right back to Heesoo's story in Ditto. Back in Side A, for instance, Heesoo did have a grey cat, and in one of the recordings she actually called Erin by the nickname Kitty Kang. Back then, Erin refused to identify herself as a cat, but in the video she interacted with the grey cat the same way the girls interact with her in the MV. Once again, this parallel implies that the fantasy that Heesoo created was somehow inspired by what she saw and heard in the reality of the psychiatric ward. The thing is that this reality is very dynamic. The video doesn't give us an objective truth because every patient has their own view of reality, and depending on their perspective, each of them is real in their own right. In the next scene, for instance, the video focuses on the doctor from the beginning, only then now the doctor is one of the patients. In turn, he sees the girls in many different ways. He sees them as patients, then as children. First they are there, and then they are not. Then we see the teddy bear, and then the girls transforming into different variations of the same group sitting at the table. If his perspective of reality is mind-bending, however, this is nothing in comparison to Danielle's, who in turn tries to convince the others that they are the members of NewJeans and they're actually shooting a music video, which incidentally also corroborates Heesoo's delusion on her channel. Now Danielle's section here transforms the video into an example of metafiction, which is a narrative where the characters of a story are aware that they're characters of a story. Whether we are talking about books, movies, or even comics, this is a style that is usually used to make a statement about the medium itself. The characters break the fourth wall, and we as the audience are reminded that what we are seeing is a work of fiction that is different from the reality that we live in. In a way, metafiction reminds us of the difference between reality and fiction, but since in Oh My God the characters are experiencing delusions, the premise of the story allows for a lot of experimentation. You see, in Danielle's story, fiction and reality are inverted. For us the audience, the girls being patients is part of a story, while the girls being idols in NewJeans is part of reality. In Oh My God, however, it's the opposite, because for the characters the psychiatric ward is their reality, while NewJeans is part of Danielle's delusion. Through her fantasy, these two worlds blur into one, and in the video Danielle literally breaks the fourth wall in order to prove her point. She shows the others the crew that is shooting the music video, and she even goes to the director in order to ask for help. This man right here, for instance, is none other than Shin Woo-seok. He is the real-life writer and director of this story. He is the one who created it, but in this context it's just a figment of Danielle's imagination, like at one point her character was a figment of his. As Danielle explores NewJeans' career to this point, her account of the truth emerges with attention until the Minji in the video turns around and finally says it's enough. When Danielle's story cuts back to the ward, Minji the doctor puts an end to the group session and takes the girls away. As they leave the room, we see a man grabbing the notepad that Erin was drawing on, and all of a sudden the doodles on the paper begin to appear in real life as well. Now that man that we see at the end is actually Lee Man-yeon, who is a popular YouTuber and webtoon author. In this cameo we see his perspective of the world that surrounds him, and since he's a cartoonist, the drawings come alive in his imagination. All in all, we can say that this story essentially showed us how relative reality can be, especially when seen through the lenses of different people's minds. In the video, each of the characters has their own view of the world that surrounds them, and on different degrees, each of them uses their imagination in order to either escape or cope with reality. In a sense, Oh My God offers more insight on what Heesoo might have felt like back in Ditto. In the video, it's very difficult to tell what is real and what is not, and the same thing happened in Side A and Side B, where Heesoo was so lost in her fantasy that it was impossible for her to tell the difference. In Oh My God, we almost see reality the way Heesoo would see it, and at the end we discovered that she didn't like it at all. After the credits, we see Heesoo writing a post on Twitter where she complains about the video that she is in. In this last meta moment, Heesoo admits that the video made her uncomfortable because she would prefer that idols would just dance and show their face. This is also coherent with what we saw in the story so far, because on her channel she reveals that the reason why she was recording the girls was actually to shoot a music video. Fittingly enough, back in Ditto, Heesoo was recording them while dancing to Oh My God, so maybe all she wanted was to make an alternative MV focused on the girls' faces and dance moves. Since this music video tells a type of story that seemingly hits way too close to home, Heesoo might have made up a scenario where she was recording another one which was closer to her taste and didn't call her out on her behavior. Considering that the story is still ongoing, to know if this is really what happened, we'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.